Alright guys, today's video is deer recovery parasites. I'm going to talk about three main ways to help reduce parasites. Of course, always I want to include a study in this to try to help back up what I'm saying. So we're going to start with soil parasites. These are the parasites you don't generally see, or they're very small, something like aphids or smaller. If deer can ingest certain parasites out of the soil, it will reduce their antler sizes or their body sizes. Just depends on how it affects the deer and what type of parasite it is. So it'd be like basically ingesting a bacteria that their stomachs don't need, that could reduce digestion rates. Parasites that cling to the intestines, that could do some serious damage and cause death to a deer. So we're going to focus on that end first. So normally parasites that are soil driven parasites will generally hang out literally in the soil, or according to a study that I looked at from Texas, which has been a few years ago, they discovered that food plots, and I've mentioned this before, but if food plots are lip high, parasites will cling to roughly that first inch of a plant, the soil parasites. So if you can focus on getting your food plot bigger than that, I would at least shoot for a 3-inch minimum. I mean, you're well within the clear at that point, and that will keep the soil parasites at bay. Now there is a few types of parasites though that it doesn't matter, and that would be your roundworms, your flatworms, tapeworms, because they can be in the feces of a deer, and even with thicker food plots, that feces is generally just going to lay on top of whatever your food plot is, and they could still ingest it that way. But the other parasites, you can keep them out of their system by just simply growing a thicker and taller food plot. Now, the other part of that study showed that just because your food plot is lip high, you could literally cost your bucks 15 inches of antler. Now, wait till I get to the pen raised deer part of this, but I'm talking about wild deer only. 15 inches of antler can be lost because your food plot is too short and you allow ugly parasites to get in that you may not even see or notice that's there. So that's the difference from having a buck that used to be a booner and reduces himself below a booner, or a buck that has been sitting on that fringe this whole time and can't quite get over the hump. It might be because your food plots are too short. So now we need to cover the other ways to affect some parasites. So we have the soil driven parasites, and now let's get into ticks. Ticks is considered a big one because they carry other diseases with them, and that can be, like Lyme disease, Rocky Mountain spotting fever. There's all kinds of things that can happen if ticks get a hold of you. So anybody that has pictures of deer where the ticks are so bad, and let's say like behind the ears is a general area to look at, or on the backside, on the haunch end of a deer, you might start seeing bald spots. Their hair literally will fall out because ticks have sucked it so bad in there, or infested so bad, it's just caused the hair to fall out. This can cause permanent scarring. The hair may never ever fill back in like it's supposed to. That can affect how a deer stays warm if the area is large enough. Especially in northern climates, the deer is going to need all the hair it can have to stay warm. So how do we reduce tick population? So we've already went over this. Now we're removing parasites by raising the height of the food plot. Onto this part, which I'm just going to briefly touch on, this is prescribed fires. If you have a habitat that is unmanaged, you are inviting an overgrown wave of ticks. Ticks and lice can be a big issue. Ticks more in general, but I'm going to clump lice into this. So where do ticks normally live? What is the breeding ground for a tick? Well, you're looking at it. All that leaf debris on the floor is the perfect tick breeding ground. And as long as this exists and nothing is done to it, they are free to multiply as many times as they want. And suddenly you've got a whole bunch of deer that look ugly or overinfested. You're going to start losing fawns. They will kill fawns. If they get enough of them on them, they will literally suck them to death. They will die. So how do we prevent the ticks and the lice? Because lice basically has about the same breeding problem. It is in the leaves and in your tall grasses in the field. So we've got two issues: tall grass and leaves, which I have all that here. Well, the answer is to burn it off. You will kill whatever ticks cannot make it to cover, whatever lice cannot get out of the way. And if you generally do a scribe fire where you can completely box the fire in, that way it's burning 360 degrees, it's a little harder for those pests to get out. So at a certain point, when you burn all this off, you're going to greatly reduce all those parasites. So I'm going to stop on that end and do its own video just for that. So your habitat, by not caring for it and properly maintaining it, can cause you to lose a lot of size in deer. If you all understand how much of a drop happens in antler size, I think this pen raised portion is going to help you. If you buy pen raised deer to improve your genetics, pen raised deer have grown antlers as large as more than 600 inches. You're never going to see that in the wild. Why is that? Parasites and stresses of living out in the wild can greatly affect a deer's rack. So if you buy from that particular pen breeder and he gives you all those ginormous bucks to turn loose on your place, do not ever expect to get what you see. If he is a knowledgeable and honest person, he will tell you that you will lose roughly 60 inches off the average size that you just purchased. So what you're looking at, if it's a 400-inch deer, it's going to drop to 340 right off the bat. See how much of a difference that is. 60 inches is a huge change in a deer's antlers. And the longer he stays out in the wild, and especially with unmanaged habitat, the smaller that rack becomes until it literally looks like something that's probably a little bit better than your normal buck. It still will have characteristics that can express quality better because of genetic breeding, but because of unmanaged habitat, you will lose lots of antler. So how can we avoid other parasites? So there's more than just flatworms, roundworms, tapeworms. There's also nasal botflies. There's weevils, gnats. Gnats can spread EHD like wildfire. So how do we fix all these other issues that can cause harm to your deer over time? Well, this is where the limiting factor comes into play. You can only do so many things to stop parasites, guys. And that is basically burning your habitat to reset it, getting your food plots larger, or I'm not like expanding your food plots. I'm talking about the height of your plants need to be taller. The other way to help your deer, supplemental feeding. That ties back into the previous video on deer recovery where I talk about supplemental feeding. You can purchase specialized feed that has parasite repellents in it, which is basically they've just put garlic in there. But it basically, what happens is when deer ingest that, in the previous video I talked about how they get larger because they ingest garlic and expands the blood flow. But one of the other items I left out, and I was kind of saving it for this video, is for whatever reason, parasites like ticks don't like garlic in animals' host system. So the more they build that up in their system, the faster they fall off of the deer and don't return. They just don't like the taste of it. So a tick may crawl back up a deer, bite onto it, and immediately go ugh, and then drop off. So you're trying to put a shield of protection around your deer using supplemental feeding to help grow them larger. So both these videos tie together, and really every recovery video I've done so far, it all ties together. But there's only so many limits that we can legally do. You cannot legally medicate a deer. So if you have bot flies, or the nasal bot flies, weevils, it's going to happen, guys. There's not anything I can do. I cannot come up here and put out the money and tie a string of misters in all these trees right here and put insect repellent in them. I can't do it. It's just an expense I don't have, and only pen raised people can do it because the deer don't leave that area. So as soon as they leave and wander off over here or go up the ridge up here, they're right back into the same problem. So you're not really helping the issue by putting a mister in a small area. You would have to put it over your entire property. Can't afford to do that. And you also can't just, like I mentioned earlier, simply medicate a deer. Those medicine bags that farmers use for cattle, where they rub up on them and it gets, you know, the lice and the ticks and the flies and all that off of them, you can't do that legally with deer. That's considered medicating a deer. So that's why you're limited to growing big food plots, supplemental feeding, prescribed fires. Do those three and you will have a much better return in your deer. Now, if you like this content, I hope you hit that like and subscribe, and hit that notification bell. That way when I make some new videos, that you would be interested in watching those. You all have a great day.